Based on the information we have now, we have every reason to believe this was an act of terror. In addition, want to note that because this is an ongoing investigation, all New Yorkers should remain vigilant. At any given point, New Yorkers may find a piece of information, hear a conversation, see something that could very much aid the NYPD, the FBI, and our partners. Want all New Yorkers to be vigilant.
That, of course, the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio. Originally, he did not call the bombing terrorism, but today he did just that. And joining us now with more, Frank Spano. He's logged a long day with us. He's the executive director of the Counterterrorism Institute, and also with us, Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. All right, a lot to unpack here, but I'll first start by saying I always find when people say be vigilant, what does that mean? And then the second thing, see something, say something. I think a lot of us think of it, oh, it's a trait. But I got to tell you, it worked. You know, you go to what happened, you know, starting on the first incident on Saturday morning in the Jersey Shore. Somebody saw something, didn't belong there. They called the authorities, delayed the actual race here, and as a consequence, yes, the guy was a moron and put it into a steel thing, but leave that aside here. It prevented possible loss of life. You then fast forward what we saw in Elizabeth, even before then in Chelsea on the 23rd Street. IED that hadn't detonated. Somebody saw something, called the authorities, and once again, that was taken out. The same thing also that was done the following day, as we saw in Elizabeth here. You know, the mayor of Elizabeth said it could have been hundreds of lives here. Now, we joked about it. I mean, it's funny now in respect, instead of the gang who couldn't shoot straight, possibly the most inept terrorist or wannabe in the history of bad guys. But nonetheless, people saw something, went to the authorities, and as a result, Frank, this thing got turned around. So I'll acknowledge it. Those, you know, often used phrase here, there's really something to it.
Absolutely. Sometimes we talk about sometimes we win, sometimes we learn. This weekend we did a bit of both. We definitely won from the idea that we are actually engaged in our own defense. This cannot be someone else's problem. And unfortunately, we live in a world where the information is just bombarding us. We're always in social media, always in our phones. Time to get our heads up and be aware with this 360 all around us. And
also the Joint Task Force worked here, where we saw in past different agencies not cooperating, whether it be the feds, who I think took lead here, but then you have the NYPD, you had the Jersey law enforcement. They actually worked and shared tactical information, let alone intel on the ground.
Exactly, which was a huge jump from pre-9/11, where we didn't see that at all. And that was one of the greatest takeaways. The learning moment from 9/11 was that organizations in law enforcement and intelligence need to work together, need to share that. I think we've seen a very unified command structure, we've seen a very unified response from all aspects of law enforcement.
You were with me live in the set when the FBI did their briefing at One Police Plaza. And while the assistant director was going to be short on details, understandably so, he seemed pretty definitive or pretty clear that they think they got the guy, that he's not part of a wider cell. How can they be so sure after 50 hours? The guy did go to a pretty decent geographical footprint to put 4 different devices. And I know evidently you can figure this stuff out online, but how do we know that maybe, if at least as you said, he may have been inspired by a third party, he could have also gotten some tactical advice here? How are we sure that he's really just a lone wolf at this point?
Absolutely, and that sort of splits 2 sides. From the operational control, this individual was likely not under full operational control of a foreign terror organization. But given the sophistication of the devices, even though they were somewhat rudimentary, they were still well ahead of what the average Joe in their basement could cook up. And so in this case, there was very likely inspiration, if not active training and education, albeit, thankfully, not sufficient education to cause a complete detonation.
And there is a gap in his timeline where we believe, I'm talking about the person in custody right now, where he spent as many as somewhere between 2 and 4 years abroad. He was a U.S. citizen, but he went back to Afghanistan at some point. He may have also gone to Pakistan. There could be some other date lines here that they'll fill in the gaps. We don't know what happened, but from at least anecdotal accounts from neighbors, et cetera, he seemed to come back changed. We don't know if he's been radicalized. We don't know, if there is anything that can be attributable to that window of time to the person he was in the last 50 hours. in terms of all the chaos that he wrought, but nonetheless they're looking into that. It just seemed to me a little bit that, okay, they're confident there's no more devices, they're confident they got the right guy, but they're pretty sure at least that's it. And he hasn't cooperated with them, so it's not like they've gotten any verbal intel from him.
Right, and in the coming days and weeks, law enforcement will begin to go through digital evidence, forensic evidence, not only from the devices obtained, but also in search warrants that have been executed at his home. There was another executed in Perth Amboy.
Yep.
I don't know that we still don't know what the response there was, but collecting digital information, looking at communications trails, whether that be social media, traditional email, et cetera.
And explain how this dingbat, when he put the flip phone on the device that didn't explode in Elizabeth, as we understand, it was his personal phone.
Correct.
And that, as much as also, and you can explain better than I, the powder substance that he had used to work as a form of to help detonate it.
Right.
Explain how those two elements have really helped law enforcement.
So they were definitely able to identify this individual through that cell phone, and the fact that the same devices were used across the same circuitry was utilized across the devices, whether it was a pipe bomb or pressure cooker, that has definitely been able to tie all of the incidents together. Elizabeth, New Jersey has not yet been definitively tied, but we're very likely to see that come in the future. This is one of the things that we see a lot in arson, when arsonists believe that they can leave information or clues and don't worry, it'll just burn up. In this case, very likely believe that that phone would detonate. Either that or he was entirely inept.
And that's one of the reasons why we think that this wasn't connected to the Central Park bombing that happened over the course of the summer, because the devices are so different and the circuitry is so different?
Correct.
And the MOs too.
And the MO. And though the FBI was very careful and the NYPD was very careful not to release any information about that device, even the actual propellant, the powder utilized, is different between the two, or at least that's what we understand at this time.
You know, guys, next segment we'll be talking to a guest who's with the FBI for 30 years, including one of the point guys in New Jersey, and we'll talk about the issue of profiling, which is what Donald Trump spoke about today, and bring that up as a debate subject. But there are a couple other things that struck me. One is, we saw what happened with New York last night. Understandable. I have no problems with anything they did. But let's say we won't look back as we will on this one, and this was just, you know, a guy couldn't get his act together with horrible intentions, etc. 29 people injured, thankfully none very seriously, all have been released from the hospital. You can only shut the bridges down for so long. You can only check so many people's bags getting onto trains or subways, or check cars coming over the spans. I guess part of me said, you know, can you stop all this? If a guy can go online and figure out how to do what he did and not have to go and get exotic, you know, it's not like he got chemical weapons here or anything. Give an idea, not that I'm trying to give a tutorial on how to do this, but he had a crock pot, he had, you know, basically, and he took some, you were talking about some of the products that they found undetonated that you can get either at a Walmart or at a supply store, right? I mean, this is not that hard to do, and look at the chaos that he wrought over a two-state area.
It's absolutely correct. I mean, tannerite, black powder, totally available over the counter. It is even available by mail. It's totally unregulated, and it's used for everything from agriculture all the way to recreation and sporting. What we did see this time, 50 hours from detonation to apprehension, we've begun to rely more heavily on the technology that's available, and that will continue to have to grow as we move forward, because the personnel, we just can't keep up with the threat.
And we were talking about this, what struck me was, if you looked at the timeline from when the first thing happened, from that road race, that 5K run, to what happened in Chelsea and then what happened in Elizabeth, there's either social media footprints on all this, or there is, you know, security cameras that are catching it. If you didn't know already, my gosh, you know, this isn't just downtown Manhattan. This was, you know, Seaside Park and Elizabeth, New Jersey, and there's cameras everywhere now.
And to your point, Richard, even video of when those heroic police officers opened fire against him.
In audio, on social media.
There's audio and video. And so to your original point, and I agree with your original point in terms of, you know, it may sound kind of goofy or corny if you see something, say something, but for law enforcement and for our own protection, it may be the best protection or tool that we have going forward, because we only have X amount of law enforcement officials, and they can't cover everything, as you said, noting the bridges, and we can go on and on and
It's
on.
impossible to put a whole community on lockdown.
With that in, I'm curious, Frank, how much of the policing on bridges and subways and being able to shut stuff down is really designed to prevent attacks, and how much is designed to be a deterrent so that people who might think about otherwise doing harm think to themselves, well, there might be a cop there that might search the car, maybe I shouldn't do this.
Right. We would hope that an individual would be deterred by all manner of security measures. Unfortunately, what we do see is that a committed enemy that has well planned the attack will continue forward with the attack until stopped. That said, there is a great degree of planning that typically goes into terrorist attacks, and hopefully it's a consideration that the more they see that their plan is likely to be foiled, or that they are likely to be caught before they can execute the plan, the less likely they're going to be to move forward on that.
Finally, we spoke, I know we have to take a break soon, about advances in technology of things like retinal scans and facial imprints where people, but again, all that seems to be designed, and it was amazing, in 50 hours what they were able to do here, okay, with what started off as a road race, where there were no eyewitnesses to the person doing this, on a seaside community in Jersey, right? To where we are right now. But nonetheless, while there's technological advancements, it would seem to be a forensic tool, kind of a technological one, to accelerate solving it or find the person. But in a preventative thing, should we have databases so if people are trying to buy gunpowder, the authorities know? Should we have somebody that if they go abroad to any of the countries that are hotspots, whether they're American citizens, and he was, that there's a notation here for a second to say, wait a second, this guy should be on the radar of something if he gets radicalized or whatever else. Where does the line start and stop between Big Brother and then also keeping track of things that might be helpful for later?
Well, there's been a lot of debate about that on both sides of the aisle with regard to the fact that this individual was not on the terror watch list at any point.
And it really didn't have a rap sheet. There was one assault issue, and again, the person who brought the claim, a family member, dropped it at a certain point.
Exactly. So the question becomes, if someone travels to a country that we know to be hostile, or at least to harbor hostile ideologies against the United States, and that person travels back to us, should they then be on a watch list instead of having to go before a screener who basically asks, were you over there involved in terrorism? To which they just say no, and they move on with their daily life.
Although this guy, I'm surprised what he would have answered.
Right.
Anyway, when we come back, we're going to bring our next guest, a 30-year veteran of the FBI out of New Jersey, to talk about the investigation into the bombings and what he sees and has seen in his time in New Jersey as it relates to some questions about whether or not there is some populations there that are more likely than maybe in other places here to act in a radicalized manner.